of a brilliant and uniquely talented man, my uncle, Anatol Kovarsky. I think you'll all agree that in celebrating Anatol, we're also honoring the lifelong partnership of he and his wife, Lucille Patton, two gifted artists who pursued successful careers in different art forms. Despite their individual successes, I'm pretty sure that they would both acknowledge that their greatest achievement was bringing my beautiful cousin, Gina, into the world. At biannual family parties, Anatol was often seen in deep conversation, the subjects of which were often over my head, most especially when they were in French, Polish, or Russian. And if you had told me that he was fluent in Swahili or Urdu, I'd not raise an eyebrow. About 10 or 12 years ago, Barbara and I hosted a weekend family reunion at our home in Vermont. As you might expect, we all spent some time recalling our family's history. Although he listened intently and obviously enjoyed hearing the stories of others, Anatol could not be convinced, cajoled, or even bribed to speak about himself. I believe that this highly accomplished man deferred not solely out of shyness, although I believe he was shy. Rather, I believe it was an inherent modesty that kept him from blowing his own horn. What I will always cherish and remember fondly is the memory of an enthusiastic greeting that I could always count on meeting Anatol. Michael, how are you? It's so good to see you. How did I do? Did I do that right? When I was a young boy, my dad, who was one of Aunt Lucille's 5 loving brothers, they're sadly all gone now, my dad went through a photography phase. His camera produced these little 2-inch transparencies called slides or whatever that needed to be viewed through a projector. Now, Dad loved to take pictures. He took plenty of pictures, but setting up the projector and focusing it and organizing the slides and getting the screen set up, especially after a long day on the golf course, on a weekend, or in the factory, that was a hassle that he never looked forward to. Now, each slide had to be manually loaded. So with as little practice that Dad had, it's no wonder that he was less than proficient as a projectionist. So the image that would be projected on the screen was as likely to be upside down as right side up, or sideways, or sideways. One memorable evening, Dad loved to announce the next slide, and he would announce the next slide, and he would say, "And now here's a picture of Aunt Lucille." Well, on that occasion, he completely neglected to load a slide at all. So instead of a picture being projected onto the screen, there was a bright light. Now, my brother and I dissolved in laughter, and we immediately named that bright light Aunt Lucille. Now, there is a point to this story. For me, Barbara, my wife, my children, and no doubt many of you, when we think of Lucille, we can picture her dancing at weddings and bar mitzvahs and bat mitzvahs, dressed elegantly from head to toe, likely in a hat or perhaps a scarf, and adorned with a shiny bauble or 2, or maybe 3 or 4. She is a real-life, beautiful icon to us, our own bright light, whom we truly cherish. She will be our first speaker, Lucille Patton.
Thank you so much for being here. I'm not referring to my written words because I can say from my heart that everybody in this room is making me cry. But I'll try not to, because I've done a lot of that. I've done a passel of crying. How do you like passel? But I'm going to refer to my notes, and I'll say what I've written down. It's an honor and pleasure for me, Gina, and Tom to greet you who give you a Sunday, some of you having traveled by plane or car or train from far away to remember Anatol Kovarsky. Unique and precious, never to be forgotten. Anything that lay near him with a pencil or pen. My dear family, nieces, nephews, grand nieces and nephews, great grand nieces and nephews, hello Barbara dearest. All descendants of my wonderful brothers and their wives, my sister-in-law, my sisters-in-law. Boots is here today. I think she's the only one of my sisters-in-law who are here today. My gorgeous nieces and nephews, I have to repeat. My wonderful colleague, Barbara Spiegel, with whom we've had many a successful acting venture with playwright Barbara, providing the words. And my friend, my dear friend Mimi Turk, dear colleague of mine. We were in a play together a long time ago when Mimi was a mere child and I was slightly older. Sita Canelba, fabulous artist, friend who we've known for so many, many, many years. And everybody in this room, I embrace you, I kiss you for being here, for paying this tribute. He always had pencils and note cards in his pockets. Even his so-called dress jackets had holes in the pockets from the sharpened pencils. But you couldn't catch him staring. He carried out his spying and recorded it so swiftly he could be present with everyone, part of the conversation, without being noticed. Drawing on napkins, paper, tablecloths in restaurants, attracting children who watched fascinated. Anatol would hand them pencils so they could draw on the tablecloths as well. Drawing, painting, looking at works of art was as necessary and as ordinary as breathing. Page 4. He is with us everywhere in the apartment. Every corner has a sample of Kovarsky's thought, wit, love. Small profile of a man's head in a fantastical headdress. A little painting that Gina hung in my room recently. So this portrait was a profile of a man with this fantastical headdress. You couldn't place it. No identifying region. But his eye, in profile, is seeing and thinking. And here you are with this absolutely unrealistic profile of an imaginary man who makes you wonder what he's thinking and what's on his mind, that he looks so concentrated and has this gleam of thought in his eye. It's a miracle that someone can do this. Just put a living creature, totally bizarrely dressed in our society, and make you think. Here is a man who is thoughtful. If he's not feeling well in the later days, I would hand him one of these business page graphs, and he'd say, "Oh no, I did too many. But no sooner did he have it in front of him that he couldn't resist making these hilarious caricatures. It was just second nature. He couldn't help organizations like Doctors Without Borders and small publications that try to call attention to the plight of countries dealing with deprivation, political rivalries, how to address and mend resulting hardships. He took time away from his work to attend meetings at SANE. I don't know if you know that organization, but it was to encourage people to influence our representatives to enact laws benefiting the whole country. In this singular, charming, considerate, fun-loving, and fun-providing man, there was a deeply responsible, loving human being, hard not to love him, and good-looking. Oh, yes. People always love to hear stories about how people meet, how lovers met. That's how plays and movies begin, and mine is certainly a storybook love affair. And my niece, Tatiana, beautiful Tatiana, insisted that I tell the story. One night over the phone, she said, "How did you meet Anatol?" Neglecting to tell me that I'd told her the story at least twice. And so I repeated it again, and I'm going to do an abbreviated version because it's much too long. I was in a play, Camino Real, and we were out of town and had just come back to New York, and I'd given up my apartment before I left and had no place to stay, but my friend Janice Mars, a wonderful actress and singer, said, "Come and stay with me in my cold water flat on Mulberry Street." I had no alternative except to go to Flatbush Avenue and stay in my parents' apartment. So, of course, Mulberry Street was preferable, even though it was cold water and the bathtub was in the kitchen. However, on to the story. So I was in Camino Real at the National Theater before it was refurbished, so the entrance was through a very dark alley with fire escapes overhead. And so I had to go to this party because Janice said she had to go to this party. It was a very nice apartment on Gramercy Park. And Andy Duggan, who was a well-known character actor, was coming back from his filming in California and wanted his apartment back, so the girls had to get out. And they gave this lavish party with waiters carrying their little jackets, and you couldn't move. It was so crowded. And apparently there were a lot of people there from the New Yorker, because there was also a current production of The Crucible, and one of the actresses there, I think, was going with Frank Modell. Now, I don't know if Frank was at the party or not, but anyway, there were a lot of New Yorker people, I learned later. Anyway, I went to this party reluctantly because I had a cold, but nevertheless, I got into my good black dress with a décolletage and put on the makeup so I'd be presentable. And soon after we got there, I see this little group of men standing in a corner, and one of them is leaning on his elbow, which is Anatol's absolutely characteristic pose. And I thought, who's that? Uh-oh. And then I heard a few words, and he seemed to have an accent. So my pals, Freddie Sadoff and Marty Balsam, said, uh-oh, look at her, she's going to go after that accent. And so I approached him, and there were introductions, and I had eyes for no one but this fellow. And I said, oh, you know, Anatol, I'm in this wonderful play, that must-see play, that's closing on Saturday. And so you should try to come and see it. And no sooner did I get that out than we were separated by the waiters and the rest of the crowd. And that was all I've seen of Anatol at that party. Well, lo and behold, the next Thursday, which was a rainy day, I came out of the theater, the stage door, in a rain hat, and if I hadn't glanced over, I would not have seen this figure under the fire escape. And I said, oh, Anatol, what are you doing there under the fire escape in the rain? Oh, well, why didn't you come backstage? well, you know. So we went next door to the bar and stayed there until they closed. And then we went across the Broadway to the Longchamp and had a sandwich until they closed. I have no idea what we talked about, but it was at 1 o'clock in the morning, and he took a taxi and we drove. We kissed all the way down to Mulberry Street. Oh my God. I want to tell you that this is the kind of thing that you dream about, you know? A man who looks so charming, and your lips meet, and it's as though they never want to separate. So anyway, the next time we met was on Saturday. I said, Anatol, we're closing. I have a lot of things to pack up. And he said, well, I'll come and pick you up. I have a car. So I said, oh, how So I'm there with a makeup, cold cream on my face, and I said to Ozza Bard, my chairmate, Ozza, I don't think he's coming, and I think I'm in love. No sooner did I say that than there was a knock at the door. He had come up the stairs. I don't know what floor we were on. It was an old theater, probably had to go up several staircases. And I said, Anatol, you did come. He said, yes. I said, well, I look terrible. I'm cold. No, you look beautiful. So again, we went to the bar and talked until it got quiet. And he said, you know, I think we should go now because I have some people at my house. So we went to his house, and people were streaming down the stairs. You're a fine host, giving a party and then leaving. And then he had left all these people and a big pot of spaghetti on the stove to come and pick me up. Oh my. So anyway, that was the beginning of our romance, and it was a romance, and we had tons of things to say to each other, although I don't know what, over the years, and now it's gone. So that's very sad. However, nothing lasts forever, no one lasts forever, and I hope it's true that there are spirits at least. Can you say hello to a spirit? Yes. 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 What they will say to you. You can only hope. Anyway, now after the story of how we met, I'm taking a long time. I hope it's not too long. This is page 5. Not too many more to go. No, we're near the end. Yes, this is the last page. I wrote a haiku. You know what a haiku is? 5, 7, 5. Hard to say goodbye, though the years would seem many, not enough of him. Today, as we memorialize one superb human being, we should also mourn with those lost in disasters, earthquakes, floods, human-sparked misery of displaced people, dying long deaths of hunger and illness. We mourn you.
Unhappy task, or happy task, falls to Lucille and Anatol's beautiful daughter, Gina.
Of course, as you can imagine, I've been in awe of both my parents my whole life. I was the fortunate daughter of 2 amazing people, and it is a hard act to follow, and but it's a blessing. It's such a blessing. I speak today also on behalf of Anatol's sister, our dear Reba Kovarsky. She was unable to travel here from Paris, she would join us in telling you how moved we are to see all of you here. My father treasured his family and friends. We always looked so forward to gatherings with our family, with my mother's family here, and wonderful uncles and aunts, wonderful cousins of mine who are here today, and other gatherings, and I would get to meet the most fascinating people through my parents. What an upbringing. So my father treasured you, and he took enormous pleasure in your company. I definitely picture him animated and smiling, wishing to embrace you and learn your news. Some of you knew Tola. Of course, his nickname was either Tolia or Tola in the family, and I think many of you called him Tola. So some of you knew him for many years, and the family connections between you go back even further into the 19th century, because some people here are from my father's side of the family, and there's a genealogy showing all of the. We go way back to a rabbi in the 17th century, actually. So for some of you, he also had been close to our and your loved ones, no longer alive today, and whose loss he also mourned, never forgotten. Parents, grandparents, beloved companions, and friends. Present here are several generations of people who have sat next to Anatol and had him draw for them as children, or have had him teach them French, including slang words that may have gotten you into trouble or out of trouble. Others among you had met him relatively recently, but had become like family. The ties deepened, and you became like family. Several of you here today never met my father in person, but know him through his work, and our hearts swell. I simply repeat what my mother has said. Our hearts swell at the tribute you pay him. We feel very, very grateful for your love and support. As Anatol was growing older and beginning to feel, as he put it, very old, he remained an artist to his very core. And so for all of us, it was very meaningful that in the last few years he was publicly honored by his peers through online tributes for work published long ago in the New Yorker magazine, almost like another lifetime ago. And he didn't forget that he had done that work, but it was somehow very renewing and very completing to have that come back, to the forefront in his consciousness in the last few years. And I believe many of you have read the kind blog posts by Bob Mankoff, cartoonist and cartoon editor for the New Yorker, and his colleague Michael Maslin, who published an interview with Dad in 2013. Michael Maslin came to the house with his wife, Plaze Juwish, and they did an interview with my father, and because actually I had not reached out to anyone from the New Yorker for some reason, and so actually I don't think they even knew much about his current life, and so it was very fun and very special. So I wanted to thank Bob Mankoff, who is here today. Thank you, Bob. And Michael sends his best. He could not be here today. There's no end to what I could say about my extraordinary father. Today I just want to give you a small picture of what he meant to me. I'll also tell you a little bit about his background, about his family history, a tiny bit. My dad's passion for art has shaped my life from early on. I grew up surrounded by his colorful works and could enjoy his extensive library of art books. He would take me to museums and on various outings, the zoo, the circus, the penny arcade. That was a fantastic Penny Arcade near Times Square. Maybe some of you remember it.
Yeah.
It was so lively, and it had such a distinctive smell also of popcorn. It was just unforgettable. And he actually did a New Yorker cover of the Penny Arcade. Or to see parades, both to share his love of city scenes and festive performances, and also as a source of inspiration for his paintings and New Yorker covers. He would usually bring a camera with him, and as Mom said, always pencils and paper. It was research. And meanwhile, I was having fun, yet unquestionably learning, too, as he would point out, eye-catching visual information. And now I'm going to refer to a photograph that's actually reproduced in the handout, or the tribute offering that we have here that was printed up. In several photos of me that Dad took when I was about 6 years old, I recently found additional proof that Dad was thinking like an artist during our outings. In one that seems to have been taken during a visit to the Metropolitan Museum, Anatol can be seen in the mirror holding the camera. He has positioned me between two candelabra so that they appear to be framing me, as in a picture. This creates a kind of infinite regress of frames within frames. When I look at that photo today, it speaks to me of his pleasure in creating illusions, in merging life with art. It's clearly very carefully staged. When we would go to the museum, especially the Guggenheim, Dad would show me how fascinating it was to look at people. Every bit as fascinating as looking at the pictures. We would turn our backs to the artwork hanging on the wall and contemplate the ever-changing kaleidoscope of patterns and colors created by our fellow visitors. It's as if we were living, all of us, inside one big, resplendent painting. Maybe my father was the perfect guide because he had, and retained for his whole life, a capacity for wonder. In recent years, his eyes would widen with delight, and he would exclaim, for example, about Google's miraculous efficacy, or after watching a tango performance on YouTube, amazing! And in Russian, это фантастика. Amazing was one of his favorite words, and it became one of ours as well in our family. I'm afraid it's also one of Trump's favorite words. Dad approached the world in a spirit of curiosity and with the soul of a world traveler. While I was growing up, there were National Geographics everywhere, along with albums about the arts and cultures from every corner of the globe. That's probably the case for a lot of people in this room. It's still very special for a kid, for any kid growing up in a house like that. A very prized birthday present were several dolls he purchased for me from the United Nations gift shop. I think he bought them for himself because they were great for another. But you know what I mean. I mean, they're just fantastic little dolls in national costume, very festive, and you can draw their national costumes and put them in the painting. So that's how things were. We were sharing all of this pleasure together. So all this conveyed the feeling that there were a lot. I did keep them in my room, though. All this conveyed the feeling that there was a lot to discover on this planet of ours, and hinted at a multiplicity of cultural perspectives. Encyclopedias, atlases, almanacs, dictionaries were consulted regularly. I think this also ran in his family, on his father's side. His father used to say that the day you stop wanting to look something up in a dictionary is the day you surrender your claim on life. Periodically, we would go visit Dad's family in Europe. On a few occasions, Anatol went without us, and when he did, he would send letters and postcards filled with amusing drawings to illustrate and enlarge upon his observations about cultural differences or funny details that struck his eye. When looking through a box of letters and notes Mom saved, I recently found a postcard Dad had addressed to my 14-year-old self. on May 6, 1971, with a picture of a medieval manuscript page depicting a plowman and his animals, quite revealing, he said, was sort of reminding him of himself sometimes, really diligent and going and, being a plowman in a way. And in which my father continued our museum visit tradition from afar. He reported, among other things, the following. "My dear Gina, today I went to the British Museum. It's a fantastic place. It's like being to Egypt, Greece, Rome, and other remote places. The section of Assyrian frescoes, bas-reliefs, is absolutely incredible. There is just too much to see and to absorb in such a short time. Demain, j'écrirai de Paris." On another postcard sent shortly thereafter from Paris and showing a kitschy hologram of the Place de la Concorde, Dad added a P.S. that he'd selected it because he thought we'd get a kick out of seeing it was made in Japan. Because on the bottom it was stamped, printed in Japan, imprimé au Japon. This would have struck his funny bone because at that time, everything in U.S. stores was made in Japan, just as today we expect to find made in China everywhere. So now it turned out that even a memento iconic of Paris had the ubiquitous Japanese provenance. I will add that in every letter and card, Dad tells us how much he misses us and loves us. His world-traveling soul was also the soul of a devoted husband and father, a person of strong attachments, responsible and loyal. Dad's life story is one of many displacements. One time when I was going through a difficult breakup, Anatol said, "Just imagine you're moving to a different country and are starting a completely new life." Good advice to apply to any challenging circumstance, and so much who he was. As many of you know, Anatol left Soviet Russia in around 1924, and that's a big a tale that I will not be able to encompass today, but you can imagine how dramatic that was, with his parents Miron and Gina. Miron was also known as Monia. So his sort of family name was Monia. So with his parents Miron and Gina, when he was about 5 years old, and Anatol grew up in Warsaw, Poland. His Polish remained as fluent as the Russian he had spoken at home, and as fluent as the French he learned while living in France before and briefly again after World War II. By the time I was born in 1956, my father spoke and wrote English so flawlessly that, except for the accent, well, the accent isn't a flaw, it's a beautiful asset. But I didn't know he had an accent. At any rate, so my father spoke and wrote English so flawlessly that while growing up, I didn't give much thought to the fact that he'd arrived in the States at the age of 22 with almost no knowledge of the language. In basic training, he luckily was taught, because he enlisted in the Army right after arriving. In basic training, he luckily was taught how to pronounce colonel correctly in English by a fellow Polish speaker, and he was on his way after that. Before long, he was acting as an interpreter while serving first in London and then when deployed to Normandy on assignment for the Army publication Stars and Stripes in June 1944. We know how Anatol delighted in language and languages. In his remarkable gift for languages, he and his sister take after Monia, my grandfather. And I'm sure that influenced my choice of profession. While learning Russian, eventually after some years well enough to finally be able to converse with him in it, I could begin traveling to the Soviet Union and thus seem to travel back in time to our family's distant past, when Dad's parents had met and fallen in love in St. Petersburg. So when in 1989, Lucille and Anatol, and again in 1990, Anatol by himself came to stay with me in that city. It was still named Leningrad at the time. Before the USSR broke apart, every one of my friends there expressed that it was like meeting a living link to the past that they believed had been irrevocably erased by 70-plus years of Soviet culture. They were very struck by that. He seemed something out of the old world. You know, he's from a Chekhov universe, your father. You didn't tell me that. I didn't realize that, you know. And for my father, it was also almost unbelievable, indeed surreal, to be in Russia during such a time of cultural and political ferment. Needless to say, some of that time was spent in artist studios and museums, showing works that could never have been exhibited when Soviet ideology had held sway. So it was very exciting. So he followed all of that, of course. Russian, the language of Dad's childhood, stayed with him always and seemed to become more important to our relationship over the years. By speaking Russian, he bridged the distance between past and present in a life that spanned almost a full century. Some of you have recently heard him sing the Russian gypsy song, Dark Eyes, Ochi Chornye, of which he was very fond and into which he poured much feeling. I won't sing it, but I will, with a purpose, say the words. So, dark eyes, passionate eyes, burning eyes, and beautiful eyes. How I love you, how I fear you. I must have seen you at a divinely enchanting hour. I find it noteworthy that in my father's version, instead of the usual, I must have seen you at an ill-fated hour, or accursed hour, недобрый час, my father always substituted, I must have seen you at a divinely enchanting hour. Divный час. I will say in parentheses that music, Russian or otherwise, had always been part of the Kovarskys' world. His father was a classically trained pianist and his mother a well-known recitalist, who had won first honors at the St. Petersburg Conservatory as a student of the composer Alexander Glazunov. Their love story began when Miron, my grandfather, heard a beautiful soprano, my future grandmother, singing around the piano at an evening reception. After their marriage, he would often serve as Gina's accompanist. With each language learned, Dad also embraced an entire universe. Our shelves were full of dictionaries of idioms, synonyms, homonyms, and the like, along with compendia of the special difficulties in French, English, and Russian. As many of you know, Anatol enjoyed sharing his insights into linguistic inconsistencies with others, even creating and illustrating extensively researched pedagogical materials of his own. Dad savored wordplay and poetry in all his languages. One favorite poem that we discovered together around the time of our last trip to Paris in July 2009, he had just turned 90, was a short verse in French by Jacques Prévert that plays on the sounds of the words for train, train, and train station, gare, which are made to echo the words for embraces tightly and causes us to lose our way. Those of you who know French may have heard this poem. Le temps nous égare, le temps nous étreint, le temps nous égare, le temps nous étreint. Written down, the puns come through more clearly. In translation, the poem means, time causes us to lose our way. Time holds us in a tight embrace. Time is for us a train station. Time is for us a train. When the time comes, I hope we will see Dad at the next station. It would be typical of him to want to meet the train and help us with our luggage. I think we get to take luggage. Those who knew Anatol realized that his commitment to art, like his fascination with languages, was rooted in a commitment to humanity. Despite his dedication to his work, he never detached himself from what was happening in society at large or in the world, as you heard from my mother. He could never pass a newsstand without buying several papers in several languages. Perhaps it was an obsession of some kind, but it was one that was rather catching, I'm afraid. If we ever took a taxi, you could be sure that Anatol would always engage the driver in conversation about the political situation in the driver's home country, yes? In time, I came to realize how much my dad's experience as a refugee from 2 totalitarian regimes and as a Jew fleeing Nazi persecution contributed to forming his cosmopolitan outlook. Because probably at the time, I just was a little worried that we wouldn't get to our next destination quickly enough. When he would speak about political affairs with the taxi driver. But I didn't, and I might not have understood what was motivating him. There was something really deep about his wanting to connect with other immigrants and people who had known a really difficult political situation. And he was genuinely interested to know their opinion, and it just was. I think it had a personal basis in his own experience. My father's stories conveyed vividly what it was like to live through the world-changing events that resulted in such upheaval for his family and for Tola himself. The Russian Revolution, the Nazis' rise to power, the occupation. Many of his experiences and those of his parents and sister Lydia could be the stuff of novels, and of our, your great-grandparents and grandparents. Yes, it seems almost incredible when you hear the stories and you know what they witnessed. It was like that for me with Dad. I was just riveted. And learned so much, and thinking about it, I still do. And I actually do try to share it a bit with my students, too, whenever I teach a class on human rights and literature, where we look at memoirs from the World War II period. It's not far from my mind, my father's stories, Among the truths I learned from my father's stories is that survival is often a question of luck. In Dad's case, as a final step in being able to leave for the United States, he was walking by the U.S. consulate in Nice, France, and having been notified that his entry visa was ready to be stamped into his passport, and having his passport on him on that Saturday, he entered and got his passport stamped. He thought, why not? I'll go now. I'll go today. I was going to go on Monday with my family, but I'm here now. Why don't I go in and get it stamped? So on Monday, when his parents and sister arrived with their passports, they were denied the stamp because the U.S. government was enforcing a quota and no other Jewish refugees would be accepted. So Anatol could get on the train to Marseille, the boat to Casablanca, and from there set sail for the U.S. on the Serpa Pinto, the last passenger ship accepting Jewish refugees bound for the United States.
Oh.
But more was at work than pure luck. My father's stories showed that in many cases people were saved because of other people's decency, empathy, and heroic risk-taking. Indeed, it was because a French woman, Madeleine Braque, a devout Catholic, sheltered Tola's father for 2 years in her apartment in Nice, along with 12 other Jews, that Anatol Kovarsky survived the war. She said, if they come for my Jews, I will go with them. By that time, the Germans had assumed control, or German Nazis had assumed control of southern France, which had previously been under Italian jurisdiction. Italian jurisdiction was very much gentler vis-a-vis the Jews. So deportation under the Germans would have been a certainty. In another instance of good fortune and altruism coming together to form a miracle, as they had prepared to leave Poland in 1939, My grandmother Gina and my aunt Lydia had been assisted by a non-Jewish former competitor of Miron's in the tannery business, and he had been able to procure for them authentic passports giving their religion as Catholic. For that reason, a few years later, at the same time that Miron had to go into hiding in Nice, Gina and Lydia were able to settle in the southern French town of Draguignan and were able to live there as Polish Catholic refugees until the liberation. Anatol's family, his immediate family, survived the war, therefore. But there were also wartime losses it was difficult for him to speak about. For me, everything about Dad's nature, kind, noble, thoughtful, witty, caring, existed in opposition to and as protection against the cruelty, mindlessness, and indifference he and his family had witnessed. He and my mother made me feel safe and loved. The world he and my mother created, a world also brought into being by our friends and families, and by all who serve beauty and goodness, is full of light. I also had the example of my parents' relationship, which showed it's possible to keep alive creativity and joy every day for many years. Sparks could fly. Believe me, they could. There was joy in that as well. There was joy. There was joy every single day up until the very, very end. It was something to behold. Until the very end of his life, Dad would beam in almost beatific fashion when Mom entered the room. Just recently, he told his sister Lydia over the phone that I'm very in love with my wife. Je suis très amoureux de ma femme. So being with Dad brought us so much joy every day. And as always, every single day of my life, there have been his paintings and drawings, and all the myriad evidence of Dad's life-affirming spirit. The drawings on the bottles, trays, stones, pallets, paper plates, shells, and scrap paper with doodles near the telephone. Is there a more fortunate daughter in the world? A little less than a month before Anatol died, he related to me a very realistic dream he'd had the night before, in which he was speaking to the Polish envoy in Upper Manhattan in New York. And he seemed convinced that this had actually happened. It was so realistic. In the dream, he mentioned to the envoy that he wanted to get into the ring to fight Schmeling. This refers, I had to look this up, this refers to Max Schmeling, the German boxer whose victory in 1936 over the African-American heavyweight Joe Louis was exploited by Hitler to promote the Nazis' ideology of Aryan German racial superiority, but whom Louis defeated in a rematch in June 1938. Making Louis an African-American national hero. In Anatol's dream, the Polish envoy replied, "I'm not so sure that's a good idea." But my father repeated, "I'd like to try my chances and get into the ring. Daddy, on the side of justice, and facing the next test of strength and the next journey so bravely. We love you and always will love you."
Our next speakers will be Jane Pat Brickman and her husband, John Brickman. You'll know Jane as our first cousin, Lucille's niece. And John and Jane are a unit, a marital unit. Our next speaker will be Nan Valen? Nan?
Bring the love of my parents first, Felice Valen and Herb Valen, longtime beloved friends of Gina, Anatol, and Lucille. To this moment, my dad isn't alive anymore, and my mom is 97 and in San Diego. My memories of Anatol and Lucille go back to shortly after my birth. We've all been close for 60 or 70 years. And my earliest experiences of art were through the person of Anatol and his drawings and quick sketches that he did in front of my face when I was as early as I
Grandniece
could.
of Gina's grandfather's first cousin. Can you keep that straight?
Wow.
Neither can I. Our next speaker needs no introduction from me, but I will introduce him anyway. That will be Gina's husband, Tom Bonfiglio.
Improving your Italian pronunciation. Yes, I'm Anatol's son-in-law, and I met Anatol around the same time that I met Gina, when she came to teach at the University of Richmond in the latter part of the last century. Anatol drove her down to campus at the beginning of the year, the same way that parents drive the freshmen down to campus. His father drove her down to campus. And we met at a faculty party for new faculty. And we hit it off right away. Spoke at length in French. I found that he was a leftist, and I had thought that everybody's parents were Republicans. I just assumed. Growing up in the suburbs, yeah, everybody's parents were Republicans. We had a great time. Bush and Reagan, Nixon. And afterwards, Anatol said to Gina, "Who's that nice young man who speaks French?" And of course, he didn't know me at all, which is why he said it. Gina thought, "Oh yes, nice." And consequently, Gina agreed to let me take her grocery shopping for a year. No making out in taxi cabs. Anyway, I basically blame my entire marriage on Anatol. Anatol the linguist, Anatol the polyglot. But as we know, language is identity. A man of multiple identities. Born in Russia, grew up in Poland, his family became French citizens. His parents were buried in France. Speaks French with his sister and then became an American citizen. But the question, who am I, was not a question that tormented him. It didn't cause an identity crisis. He moved in and out of these multiple identities with fluidity. All of us have identity problems. Perhaps not international or multilingual, but we have them nonetheless. Father, lawyer, husband, mother, professor, wife, mother, psychotherapist, wife. But not Anatol. These identities did not torment him. He played with them, he celebrated them. In his cartoons, flying saucers descending upon Mount Rushmore and fleeing in terror. The aliens see the presidents, symbols of patriotism, of nationalist authority. Anatol, the strange visitor from another planet, using a universal language of signs, makes light of all this. And his art encourages us to do the same. Okay, class, open your books, please, and you'll see this wonderful cartoon across from this picture. Two guys looking up at the ceiling. Two guys banging heads. Is this a confrontation? Yes, possibly. But the confrontation is preempted through humor. And they are looking at the ceiling, sublimating, transcending the confrontation into art. On the back, the Asian design on the brochure. artist at the bottom. But what do we see at the very top? Two doves kissing. Two doves kissing at the top. Visual puns everywhere, in Greek, Roman, Egyptian, Asian, Arab settings. The Wall Street graph that Lucille mentioned, that turns into funny faces. It's Anatol's form of Occupy Wall Street. In the cartoon without a caption, and there's a lot of them, most of them in Kovarsky's world are without caption. The absence of a language is the presence of all languages, a universal language, a transcendent, life-affirming, pan-human communication. There's a lesson there for us. Anatol shows us that multiple identities and differences are not a crisis, but an occasion for playful affirmation. Let us live that lesson.
Our penultimate speaker, I believe, will be Tatiana Blackington-James, another of Lucille and Anatol's nieces. Tot is the daughter of Barbette Blackington and the youngest of Edward and Gussie Pack's children, Newton Pack. Tot.
Thanks, Michael. Aren't you glad I made her tell the story of how they met? I want to talk about just a few of the many visits I made to apartment 3A over the years. The first one that I really remember vividly, I think I was in nursery school, and my dad took me up from Washington, D.C., where we lived, to visit Sister Antola, as he called them. And I was invited to my older cousin's room, which delighted me because she was very glamorous and had this long blonde hair. And we were going to draw. And when I got to her room, she explained to me that we weren't going to draw in a coloring book or on a pad of paper. We were going to decorate her windowsill in magic marker. And this was pretty shocking to me because I was not allowed to draw on any surface of my home or on any surface of any of my friends' homes. But I could sense even then that Gina was not a rule breaker. So I knew, because the windowsill was half covered already, that this had been sanctioned from above by the And it was thrilling to me and also a great honor to be given their very home as a canvas for
Some
my creativity.
food with us at Carmine's and some drink. I hope you'll all come. I look forward to embracing you all personally. I love this room and the people in it.